"Stay back, Nadie," David whispered, his voice low and urgent as the last light of day bled into the Oklahoma plains. The sun hung heavy, painting the dusty street in shades of amber and gold, while long shadows stretched like fingers across the ground. Nadie stood frozen, her hands trembling around a bundle of fabric she'd sewn for him, her dark eyes wide with fear and hope. The forge glowed behind David, its heat pulsing in the air, the steady clang of his hammer now silent. He wiped sweat from his brow and stepped toward her, but then George Ramsey's shadow loomed at the door. His voice sliced through the stillness, cold and cruel. "What's a Cherokee girl doing here?" He snarled, his lip curling as he glared at Nadie. She felt her chest tighten, the weight of his words crashing down like a storm. David's fists clenched, his kind eyes flashing with anger, but Ramsey turned to the growing crowd, his voice rising. "This is what happens when you mix with them." Nadie's heart sank. Her love for David suddenly, a fragile thread, stretched thin under the endless sky. Nadie's world was a patchwork of shadows and light, stitched together with threads of longing and loss. At 25, she lived in a small wooden house on the edge of town, its walls steeped in the scent of sage and the echoes of her grandfather Tayanita's stories. His voice, rough but steady, carried the pain of the Trail of Tears, his blind eyes seeing more than most. She worked tirelessly, her nimble fingers weaving Cherokee patterns into every garment, each stitch a quiet rebellion against a town that despised her. But her heart pulled her elsewhere, toward David the blacksmith, with hands gentle enough to hold her dreams. Their love was a secret bloom in a field of thorns, condemned by the Cherokee elders who begged her to stay true to her roots and the white townsfolk who spat at her shadow. Tayanita's cough rattled louder each day, his medicine a distant hope she couldn't reach. Caught between her duty to him and the ache in her soul for David, Nadie felt the sky above her stretch wide and unyielding, pressing her choices into the dust. The Oklahoma dusk was heavy with heat as Nadie trudged home, clutching her soiled fabric, her heart bruised by Ramsey's cruel words. She sank onto a wooden stool by the kitchen fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on her face. Her eyes stung, replaying the crowd's scornful glares, their whispers cutting like knives. Tayanita's soft voice called from the next room, steady and warm, pulling her from her thoughts. She shuffled in, her shoulders slumped, and sat beside her blind grandfather. He spoke of their Cherokee ancestors, their strength through suffering, his words wrapping around her like a blanket. Nadie forced a smile, hiding her tears to ease his worry. Her gaze drifted to the door, her chest tight with fear for David, his bloodied face haunting her. Tayanita's rough hand found hers, his voice firm. "You're stronger than you know." She hugged him tightly, her resolve hardening, vowing silently to fight Ramsey's hatred, her love for David and her grandfather fueling her courage. The small house glowed faintly, the fire crackling as Tayanita sat close, his voice deep with the weight of history. He told Nadie of the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee's pain etched in his words, each syllable heavy with memory. Nadie listened, her heart aching as she pictured her people's suffering, their footsteps through sorrow. Tayanita's weathered face softened, urging her to be like the oak, unyielding in storms. She nodded, but her thoughts tangled with David, his gentle smile clashing with the town's cruelty. To quiet her mind, she grabbed her needle and thread, stitching patterns into cloth, her fingers moving mechanically. A harsh cough from Tayanita broke her focus, her eyes widening with worry as she rushed to his side. She checked her coin pouch, her stomach sinking at its lightness, far too little for his medicine. Kneeling by the fire, Nadie whispered a prayer to her ancestors, her voice trembling, begging for strength to carry her through the darkness. Moonlight spilled through the window as David slipped toward Nadie's house, his face bruised, pain sharp with each step. He tapped the door softly, careful not to wake Tayanita, his breath uneven from the day's blows. Nadie opened it. Her gasp, sharp, as she saw his swollen cheek, her heart twisting. David pulled her into his arms, his voice fierce, promising to shield her no matter the cost. He urged her to run away with him, to start fresh, far from the town's hate. Nadie shook her head, her eyes wet, unable to leave Tayanita or her people behind. David's gaze held hers, steady and sure, swearing to find another way. They stood close, the night wrapping around them, until he slipped back into the shadows. Nadie watched him fade, her fingers brushing the doorframe, fear and love battling within her, his promise echoing in the quiet. Nadie sat alone, the moon's pale light streaming through the wooden window, casting faint patterns on the floor. Her fingers traced the ring in her pocket, David's proposal, a warm memory now chilled by Ramsey's threats. Sleep fled as fear of his revenge gnawed at her, each creak of the house spiking her pulse. Tayanita's story stirred in her mind, their resilience a faint spark against her doubt. She clenched her fists, deciding she wouldn't abandon David, no matter the risk. Needing guidance, she scratched a quick letter to Lila, her closest friend, her hand shaking slightly. A sudden cough from Tayanita's room sent her rushing to him, her heart racing. She tucked a blanket around his frail frame, his breathing uneven, her chest heavy with the weight of caring for him, and holding on to her love, the night stretching long and unforgiving. David stood in his forge, the air thick with the smell of metal and ash, his heart aching for Nadie. He gripped his hammer, but his hands trembled, Ramsey's sneering face flashing in his mind. A white customer entered, his eyes narrowing with contempt, muttering about David's ties to Nadie. David's fingers closed around the ring in his pocket, his jaw tightening, refusing to let go of their future. He sat later, penning a letter to Nadie, each word a vow to stand by her side. Caleb's heavy steps interrupted, his voice sharp, warning David to stay away from her. David stood firm, his defiance earning a hard shove against the wall, pain flaring in his ribs. He rose, blood on his lip, his eyes blazing with resolve, silently swearing to protect their love, the forge's dying embers mirroring his burning determination. Nadie walked through the Oklahoma dust to Lila's small house, her heart heavy with worry and a flicker of hope. The morning sun warmed her back, but Ramsey's cruel words still echoed, sharp and stinging. Lila sat outside, weaving a basket, her smile bright as she waved Nadie over. Nadie sank onto a stool, her voice breaking as she spilled the story of Ramsey's humiliation and David's bruises. Lila's arms wrapped around her, warm and steady, her words soft but firm, insisting love was worth fighting for. She spoke of their Cherokee ancestors, fierce and unbroken, her eyes sparking with pride. Nadie's chest tightened, torn between her love and the tribe's expectations, and she asked what the elders might say. Lila squeezed her hand, promising to stand by her, her loyalty a lifeline. They knelt together, praying under the open sky, the wind carrying their words to the spirits, Nadie's heart lifting slightly, though fear lingered like a shadow. The tribal hall smelled of sage and old wood as Nadie stood before the Cherokee elders, her pulse racing. Her voice trembled but held steady, explaining her love for David, each word heavy with truth. The elders' faces hardened, their eyes cold, one elder's voice sharp, demanding she choose her people over an outsider. Nadie's throat tightened, her hands clasped tight, feeling trapped between worlds. She bowed her head, the weight of their disapproval crushing her spirit. As she left, the wind howled outside, mirroring the storm in her heart. She whispered to herself, vowing to find a path forward, her love for David and her duty to Tayanita pulling her in opposite directions. The elder's words echoed, but her resolve flickered, refusing to fade completely. Nadie sat by the dim glow of a candle, her small house quiet, except for Tayanita's soft breathing. Her heart ached as she wrote a letter to David, each word a stab of pain, asking to part for his safety. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink, her chest tight with loss. She sealed the envelope, her fingers lingering, hating the choice but fearing Ramsey's wrath. Lila arrived, her face solemn, and took the letter with a nod, her eyes full of understanding. Nadie turned to Tayanita, tending to him as he slept, his frail form a reminder of her duty. She picked up her sewing, the needle moving slowly, trying to bury her longing for David. Tayanita stirred, sensing her sorrow, his weak voice urging her to follow her heart, leaving Nadie torn, the candle's flame wavering as her hope dimmed. David hunched over a workbench in the forge, the air thick with soot, his heart raw from Nadie's letter. He read her words again, each one a wound, her plea to stay apart twisting his gut. The ring in his pocket felt heavier, a promise he refused to break. Caleb's boots thudded on the floor, his sneer cutting through the silence, mocking David's love for Nadie. He demanded David end it, his voice cold and threatening. David stood tall, his fists clenched, spitting out a defiant refusal. Caleb's fist slammed into him, sending him crashing to the ground, pain exploding in his jaw. He staggered up, blood dripping, his eyes fierce with resolve, silently vowing to protect Nadie, the forge's heat fueling his unyielding spirit. Nadie's breath caught as she slipped into the forge, the dim light revealing David's fresh bruises. Her eyes burned with tears, guilt flooding her for his pain, believing her love had caused it. David took her hands, his touch gentle, insisting he'd never regret choosing her. She choked out an apology, her voice thick with sorrow, feeling the weight of her letter. He shook his head, his words steady, promising they'd face the town together. Nadie's voice faltered as she shared the elder's rejection, her fear of losing Tayanita spilling out. David pulled her close, his embrace warm, swearing to find a way through, his strength a beacon in her storm. They stood in the forge's glow, their love a fragile flame against the world's hatred, Nadie's heart torn but clinging to hope. Nadie crouched behind a stack of barrels outside the saloon, the Oklahoma night thick with the smell of whiskey and dust. Her heart pounded as she overheard Ramsey and Barrett, their voices low and scheming, plotting to seize Cherokee land with forged deeds. Ramsey's cold laugh sent a shiver down her spine, his words dripping with greed. Barrett's agreement, slick and smug, fueled her anger, her fists clenching in the dirt. She memorized every detail, her mind racing with the weight of their betrayal. Slipping away, she avoided the glow of lanterns, her steps quick and silent, fear urging her home. In the dim light of her kitchen, she whispered the truth to Tayanita, his blind eyes steady as he nodded, urging her to act. Nadie's resolve hardened, her anger afire, determined to uncover proof and stop Ramsey's plan, her people's future at stake. Under a sliver of moon, Nadie trailed Ramsey through the quiet town, her breath shallow as she hid in the shadows of an alley. His heavy steps led to an old barn, its weathered boards creaking as he entered. She waited, her pulse hammering, until he left, his lantern fading into the night. Nadie crept forward, her hands trembling as she pushed the barn door open, the air inside musty and thick. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight, revealing a rusted chest in the corner. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, her heart leaping as it clicked open. Inside she found a ledger, its pages filled with illegal deals, a key to Ramsey's lies. She clutched it, her chest tight with triumph and dread, knowing this discovery could change everything or destroy her. Nadie knelt in the barn's shadows, the ledger open under a flickering lantern she'd lit. The pages listed names and sums, proof of Ramsey's theft, each line a betrayal of her people. Her hands shook as she copied the details onto a scrap of paper, her pencil scratching quickly, urgency driving her. A gust of wind rattled the door, making her jump, her breath catching as she feared discovery. She double-checked her notes, her eyes scanning for errors, every number critical. Folding the paper, she tucked it inside her coat, her heart racing with the weight of her secret. She relocked the chest, erasing her presence, and slipped out, the night swallowing her steps. Nadie ran home, the ledger's truth burning in her mind, a weapon she'd wield against Ramsey's greed. Nadie hurried to Lila's house, the dawn light barely breaking as she knocked softly. Lila opened the door, her eyes widening at Nadie's tense face, ushering her inside where a small fire warmed the room. Nadie pulled out the copied ledger pages, her voice low but urgent, explaining Ramsey's plan to steal their land. Lila's fingers traced the numbers, her jaw tightening as she grasped the scale of the crime. They sat close, whispering plans, Lila suggesting a letter to a federal lawyer, her tone fierce with hope. Nadie hesitated, fear of Ramsey's reach gnawing at her, but Lila's steady gaze gave her courage. They drafted the letter together, sealing the evidence inside, Nadie's heart lifting with the possibility of justice. Lila hugged her, their bond a shield, though Nadie's worry for Tayanita lingered, her resolve tempered by love. The post office stood quiet, its wooden counter worn smooth by years of use. Nadie approached, her hands sweaty as she handed over the sealed letter, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The clerk nodded, tossing it into a sack, his indifference a small relief. She stepped into the bright morning, the sun warm but unable to ease her tension. Days passed, each one heavy with waiting, until a reply arrived, the lawyer's neat script promising an investigation. Nadie's lips curved into a hopeful smile, her chest lightening for the first time in weeks. At home, Tayanita's cough grew worse, his frail form pulling her back to worry. She sat by him, sharing the lawyer's promise, his weak nod filling her with pride and pain, her prayers to the ancestors now laced with cautious hope. The saloon's dim light cast long shadows as Barrett stood in a back room, his fingers gripping Nadie's letter to the lawyer. His face flushed with rage, the paper crumpling in his fist as he read her accusations against Ramsey's land scheme. He muttered curses, his voice low and venomous, vowing to silence her. Storming out, he rode through the Oklahoma dusk to Ramsey's grand house, dust swirling behind him. Inside, he slammed the letter down, his words sharp as he warned Ramsey of Nadie's meddling. Ramsey's eyes narrowed, his command to find the traitor chilling the air. Unaware, Nadie sat at home, her needle moving through fabric, her soft humming of a Cherokee song masking her unease. Lila arrived, her brow creased with worry, sensing danger but unable to name it. They sat close, their hands clasped, the quiet of the night heavy with unspoken fears, Nadie's heart tight as she prayed for Tayanita's strength. David slipped into the saloon, the air thick with tobacco and murmured deals. He tucked himself into a corner, his hat low, ears straining to catch Caleb and Hank's conversation. Their voices carried, brash and unyielding, boasting of killing anyone who opposed Ramsey's land grab. David's jaw clenched, anger surging through him, his hands balling into fists. He scribbled their words on a scrap of paper, each thread a spark to his resolve. As they staggered out, he followed at a distance, his steps careful to avoid notice. At Nadie's house, he shared the chilling news, his voice low but fierce, urging her to act. Nadie's eyes widened, her heart pounding with fear and determination, knowing they had to move quickly to stop Ramsey's men, their shared defiance, a fragile shield against the looming threat. The barn loomed dark under a thin moon as David crept back, driven to find more proof of Ramsey's crimes. He eased the door open, its creak loud in the silence, his lantern casting shaky light. He rifled through papers, his fingers swift, uncovering a letter detailing Ramsey's bribes. A sudden shadow fell across the floor, and Hank's rough voice barked, "Traitor!" David spun, but Hank's fist caught him, pain exploding in his face. He fought back, his arms straining, but Hank overpowered him, binding his wrists and shoving him into a corner. David's shouts were muffled by a rag, his heart racing as he thought of Nadie. Hank stormed out, leaving him in darkness. David's mind frantic, struggling against the ropes, his resolve to protect Nadie burning despite the pain. Nadie stirred from a restless sleep, the faint tap at her door jolting her awake. She stumbled over, finding a crumpled note slipped underneath, its scrawl urgent. "David's in trouble, Barn." Her stomach dropped, fear clawing at her as she recognized the knocker's hand. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking, and saddled her horse alone, Lila unreachable in the dead of night. The ride was cold, the barn's silhouette growing larger, its darkness swallowing her courage. She tied her horse, her breath visible in the chill, and crept toward the barn, her ears straining for any sound. Her fingers brushed the door, her heart hammering, torn between dread and the desperate need to save David, her love a beacon in the oppressive night. Nadie pushed the barn door, its groan loud in the stillness, her eyes adjusting to the dark. A faint moan from the corner froze her, her whisper, "David?" trembling with hope and terror. She found him slumped against a post, his face battered, ropes cutting into his wrists. Her fingers worked frantically, loosening the knots, tears welling as she saw his pain. David's eyes fluttered open, his voice weak, murmuring her name, filling her with relief. She pulled him up, his weight heavy, and guided him out, her arm around him. They stumbled to her horse, the night air sharp, Nadie's heart racing as they rode away, her grip tight, vowing to keep him safe, the barn fading behind them, a symbol of their narrow escape. Nadie sat by the fire in her small Oklahoma home, the crumpled note from the knocker trembling in her hands. The words, "David's in trouble," "barn," burned into her mind, her heart racing with fear for him. She read it again, her breath catching, the mysterious Cherokee's aid both a comfort and a mystery. Lila burst through the door, her face pale but determined, nodding as Nadie showed her the note. They gathered a lantern and rope, their movements quick, Nadie's thoughts flashing to Tayanita's frail form, praying he'd hold on. The night was thick, stars hidden, as they crept toward Ramsey's barn, Lila's steady presence calming Nadie's nerves. Lila took watch outside, her whisper fierce, urging Nadie to hurry. Nadie slipped inside, her chest tight with dread, the darkness swallowing her, her love for David driving her forward, a fragile hope against the looming danger. Nadie's lantern flickered as she moved through the barn, her heart leaping at David's faint groan. She found him tied in a corner, his face bruised, his breath shallow, her hands shaking as she cut the ropes. David stirred, his weak smile easing her panic, his voice hoarse as he murmured her name. Lila hissed from the door, warning of footsteps, spurring Nadie to move faster. She pulled David up, his weight heavy, her arms straining as they stumbled out, Lila guiding them into the shadows. They hid behind crates, holding their breath as Hank's boots passed, his curses fading. Nadie clutched David's hand, tears mixing with relief, vowing to protect him. They fled to safety, the barn's silhouette shrinking, Nadie's heart pounding with gratitude and fear, their escape a defiant stand against Ramsey's cruelty. David sat by Nadie's fire, his bruises stark in the dim light, his voice rough, as he recounted Ramsey and Hank's plan to kill resistors. Nadie scribbled every word, her hand trembling, anger flaring at their ruthlessness. Lila leaned in, her eyes fierce, suggesting a tribal meeting to expose the truth. Nadie hesitated, her worry for Tayanita's health gnawing at her, but she nodded, knowing silence wasn't an option. David's hand covered hers, his promise to guard her at the meeting, a steady anchor. They huddled around the table, mapping out their plea to the elders, their voices low but resolute. Nadie's thoughts drifted to her grandfather's stories, her resolve hardening to honor her people. She knelt later, praying to her ancestors, her heart heavy but determined, the fire's warmth a faint echo of her growing courage. The Cherokee meeting hall buzzed with voices, the air thick with sage as Nadie faced the elders. Her voice rang clear, detailing Ramsey's scheme to steal their land, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. Lila passed out copies of the ledger, her movements brisk, the evidence stark against the elders' furrowed brows. A few questioned the paper's truth, their voices sharp, but Nadie stood firm, urging unity. The elders exchanged glances, their nods slow but certain, signaling support. The crowd's murmurs grew into a roar, their fists raised in defiance, filling Nadie with hope. She stepped outside, her breath catching, the weight of their trust, both heavy and uplifting. Lila's arm brushed hers, a silent promise of solidarity, Nadie's heart swelling with the tribe's strength, though fear for Tayanita lingered. The hall vibrated with unity, Nadie's words still echoing as she rallied the Cherokee, her voice strong with conviction. Lila handed out more evidence, her eyes bright, explaining each damning line. An elder stood, his call for action igniting the crowd, their cheers a wave of resolve. Nadie scanned the faces, their fire mirroring her own, her thoughts on Tayanita's pride. A sudden crash shattered the moment, Caleb's men bursting in, stones flying through the air. Nadie shouted for calm, her voice drowned by chaos, her heart lurching as Tayanita fell, blood on his brow. She rushed to him, her hands trembling, cradling his frail body, terror gripping her. Lila fought back, shoving a thug away as the tribe rallied, driving Caleb's men out, Nadie's tears falling, her plea for Tayanita to hold on a desperate whisper in the fading uproar. The tribal hall dissolved into chaos as Caleb's men stormed in, their shouts and thrown stones shattering the air. Nadie's voice cracked, yelling for calm, her words lost in the panic as people scattered. Her heart stopped when she saw Tayanita crumple, a stone striking his temple, blood trickling down his weathered face. She dropped to his side, her hands trembling as she cradled him, his frail body heavy in her arms. Lila swung at a thug, her fists fierce, protecting the elders nearby. The Cherokee rallied, their shouts rising, driving Caleb's men back into the night, their retreat marked by fading curses. Nadie's tears fell, her voice a desperate whisper, begging Tayanita to hold on, his shallow breaths tearing at her soul. She lifted him gently, supported by Lila, her resolve hardening despite the fear, vowing to make Ramsey pay for this violence, her grandfather's pain fueling her fight. Nadie sat by Tayanita's bed, the room dim with the scent of sage and worry. His chest barely moved, each ragged breath a knife in her heart, his bloodied bandage stark against his pale skin. She held his hand, her fingers tracing his calloused palm, memories of his stories flooding her with love and grief. David entered quietly, his face etched with concern, setting down a bowl of water to clean Tayanita's wound. Tayanita stirred, his voice weak but warm, whispering pride in Nadie's courage, his words a fragile lifeline. She choked back sobs, guilt gnawing at her for bringing him to the meeting. Lila knelt beside her, their silent prayers blending, a shared hope to keep him alive. Nadie kissed his forehead, her resolve deepening, promising to fight for their people, her heart breaking as she faced his fading strength, the quiet room heavy with her love and fear. A soft rustle woke Nadie, her eyes catching a note slipped under the door, its edges worn. She unfolded it, her pulse quickening at the knocker's scrawl. More proof. Ramsey shed. Now. Hope sparked through her despair, a chance to strike back at Ramsey. She slipped out, leaving Tayanita sleeping, her steps quick in the pre-dawn chill. At the shed, hidden in a grove, she pried up loose floorboards, her hands steady despite her fear. A box revealed letters and forged deeds. Ramsey's corruption laid bare, her breath catching at the find. She tucked them into her coat, her heart racing, knowing the risk but driven by Tayanita's sacrifice. Back home, she showed Lila, their eyes meeting with fierce determination, planning to send the evidence to a newspaper, Nadie's grief channeling into a burning need for justice. Nadie and Lila worked by candlelight, copying the shed's documents, their hands swift as they transcribed Ramsey's bribes. Lila's voice was firm, urging they send the evidence to a big city paper, her eyes alight with defiance. Nadie nodded, her thoughts on Tayanita, his weakening breaths pushing her forward. They sealed the letter, Nadie's fingers lingering on the envelope, fear of Ramsey's reach battling her hope. David arrived, volunteering to deliver it to a distant post office, his steady gaze easing her worry. Lila sketched a plan to rally the tribe for a public stand, her words sharp with purpose. Nadie prayed silently, her ancestors' strength a whisper in her heart, asking for courage. They embraced, their bond a fortress, Nadie's resolve solidifying, the candle's flame a symbol of their fight. Though Tayanita's frail state weighed heavy on her soul, David rode through the dawn, the letter to the newspaper tucked safely in his coat, his heart pounding with the mission's weight. At the post office, he handed it over, his voice calm but urgent, ensuring its delivery. On the road back, he spotted Hank's shadow trailing him, his pulse spiking as he veered into a side path to lose him. Nadie waited at home, tending Tayanita, her hands gentle but her mind restless, fear for David gnawing at her. Lila burst in, her face bright, with news that the paper had received their letter, a spark of victory in her eyes. Nadie's lips curved slightly, hope rekindling, and she shared the update with Tayanita, his faint nod, a quiet blessing. She sat by his side, her fingers brushing his, the weight of their fight mingling with love, her prayers rising for David's safety and their people's future. The night was thick with menace as Hank crept into Ramsey's shed, his lantern casting eerie shadows. He poured oil over the crates, his cruel laugh echoing as he struck a match, flames roaring to life. The blaze devoured the documents, smoke billowing into the Oklahoma sky, erasing the evidence Nadie had risked so much to find. David spotted the glow from afar, his heart sinking as he raced toward the shed, too late to save the papers. He stumbled back to Nadie's house, his face ashen, delivering the devastating news. Nadie collapsed onto a chair, tears streaming down her face, the loss crushing her hope. Lila wrapped her arms around her, whispering that the newspapers still had their copies, her voice fierce with defiance. Nadie clutched Tayanita's blanket, her sobs quieting, resolve flickering back as she vowed to keep fighting, the fire's destruction a painful spur to her determination. Nadie sat beside Tayanita, the room heavy with the scent of herbs and grief, his shallow breaths a constant ache in her chest. She held his hand recounting the shed's loss, her voice breaking as guilt weighed her down. Tayanita's eyes fluttered open, his whisper urging her to press on, his faith in her a fragile light in her darkness. David slipped in, his voice soft, sharing that the newspaper was investigating, a spark of hope in his tired eyes. Nadie's tears fell, her promise to Tayanita fierce, vowing not to let his sacrifice be in vain. Lila knelt nearby, suggesting a larger protest to force the truth out, her tone resolute. Nadie nodded, her heart torn between love for her grandfather and the fight for her people, his weakening grip pushing her to stand stronger, the room a quiet battleground of hope and sorrow. Lila spread a rough map across Nadie's table, her finger tracing the town hall square, planning a protest to expose Ramsey. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows as Nadie stitched a Cherokee flag, her hands trembling with emotion, each stitch a tribute to Tayanita. David leaned in, promising to rally white townsfolk, his voice steady despite his bruises. Lila reached out to young Cherokee, her words bold, urging them to join the stand. Nadie's chest tightened, fear of Ramsey's retaliation gnawing at her, but she pushed it aside, her resolve ironclad. She whispered a prayer, her ancestors' strength the quiet hum in her heart, asking for courage. The three clasped hands, their unity a shield, Nadie's thoughts on Tayanita's fading breath, her determination a fire that refused to dim. Nadie woke to Lila's urgent knock, her friend's voice breaking as she said Tayanita was slipping away. Nadie rushed to his side, her heart shattering at his still form, his breaths faint and uneven. Tayanita's eyes opened briefly, his voice a whisper, urging her to save their people, his love a final gift. Nadie sobbed, clutching his hand, begging him to stay, her world crumbling. David entered, his eyes red, kneeling beside her, his silent presence a steady comfort. Lila brought news that the protest was ready, her tone soft but firm, urging Nadie to act. Nadie kissed Tayanita's forehead, her tears falling, choosing to fight as he wished, her grief a heavy cloak. She stood, wiping her eyes, her resolve forged in loss, ready to face Ramsey, Tayanita's words echoing in her soul. Nadie stood in her small room, the dawn light pale, her heart torn as she faced her final choice. Tayanita's frail form lay still, his time slipping away, each breath a countdown she couldn't bear. His words, urging her to fight, rang in her mind, pushing her toward the protest. She dressed in Cherokee cloth, the fabric heavy with heritage, tying a flag around her shoulders. David pulled her close, his embrace warm, promising to face Ramsey beside her, his strength bolstering hers. Lila prepared banners, her eyes fierce with purpose, handing Nadie one to carry. Nadie stepped outside, her heart heavy but unyielding, the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. She thought of her ancestors, their courage flowing through her, her steps firm as she walked toward the town hall, ready to honor Tayanita's legacy. Nadie knelt beside Tayanita's bed, the Oklahoma morning dim, the air heavy with the scent of sage. His hand felt cold in hers, his breaths faint, each one a quiet stab to her heart. Tayanita's eyes fluttered open, his voice a weak whisper, urging her to fight for their Cherokee people, his words a spark in her grief. Nadie's tears fell, her promise fierce, vowing to honor his strength. She leaned close, her voice trembling, telling him of the protest planned at the town hall. Lila tapped at the door, her face solemn, signaling it was time to go. Nadie kissed Tayanita's forehead, her heart breaking as she stood, wiping her eyes. She clutched his blanket, drawing courage from his love, her resolve hardening like stone, ready to face Ramsey, her grandfather's fading presence, a call to carry on. The town hall square buzzed with restless Cherokee, their voices mingling under the Oklahoma sun. Nadie walked through the crowd, a Cherokee flag draped over her shoulders, its colors bold against her trembling frame. David held her hand, his eyes scanning for trouble, his grip a steady anchor. Lila handed out banners, her shouts rallying the tribe, her energy infectious. Nadie felt the crowd's strength, their unity a pulse that echoed Tayanita's stories, filling her with purpose. She climbed onto a crate, her heart pounding, ready to speak, her thoughts on her grandfather's sacrifice. The Cherokee sang, their voices rising, a defiant hymn against Ramsey's greed. Nadie gripped the flag tighter, her fear fading, replaced by a fierce determination to protect her people's land. Nadie stood tall on the crate, her voice cutting through the crowd's murmurs, exposing Ramsey's plan to steal Cherokee land. She held up the copied ledger pages, her hands steady, each word a strike against his lies. The crowd roared, their anger swelling, faces set with resolve. Ramsey pushed forward, his face red, shouting that Nadie lied, his voice sharp with desperation. She stood firm, her gaze locked on his, detailing Barrett's corruption, her voice unwavering. David stayed close, his stance protective, ready to shield her from the restless crowd. Lila waved the Cherokee flag, her cries urging the people to stand united, her passion igniting theirs. A few white townsfolk nodded, their support a fragile bridge. Nadie's heart lifting, fueled by the crowd's fire, though Tayanita's absence ached within her. Chaos erupted as Caleb and his men charged into the square, their clubs swinging, shouts tearing through the air. Nadie's voice faltered, calling for unity, her words drowned by the clash of bodies. The crowd fought back, their fists and voices rising, pushing against the attackers. A thug lunged at Nadie, his club raised, her breath catching in fear. David tackled him, his body a shield, taking a blow to keep her safe. Lila waved the flag higher, her shouts rallying the Cherokee, her defiance a beacon in the turmoil. Nadie jumped down, her heart racing, helping an elder to safety, her eyes scanning for David. The tribe's strength held, forcing Caleb's men to retreat, Nadie's pulse pounding, her resolve unbroken, the square a battleground of courage and resistance. David staggered to his feet, blood streaming from his forehead, pain flashing across his face as Nadie reached him. She cried out, her hands cupping his face, fear and love crashing within her as she saw his wounds. David gripped her hand, his voice hoarse, insisting he was fine, his eyes fierce with determination. Lila shoved a thug back, her strength unwavering, protecting the crowd's edge. The Cherokee pushed forward, their unity overpowering Caleb's men, driving them out. Nadie stood again, her voice shaking but resolute, calling for justice, the crowd's cheers bolstering her. A few white allies joined, their voices adding to the chorus, a sign of hope. Nadie's heart ached for Tayanita, but she drew strength from David's side, their shared fight a testament to their love, the square alive with their defiance. The town hall square pulsed with tension, the crowd's shouts echoing as Nadie stood on her crate, her voice fierce. A cloaked figure emerged, his presence silencing the chaos, his Cherokee robe slipping to reveal an elder's weathered face. He declared himself a former federal clerk, his tone steady, raising a sheaf of papers detailing Ramsey's crimes. The crowd hushed, hanging on his every word as he exposed Barrett's bribes, each revelation a spark to their fury. Nadie's eyes widened, her heart leaping, recognizing the knocker, his aide, a lifeline through her fight. He handed her the documents, his nod urging her to speak, his trust heavy in her hands. The Cherokee roared, demanding Ramsey's arrest, their voices a tidal wave. Nadie clutched the papers, her resolve blazing, Tayanita's spirit urging her on, the square alive with the promise of justice. Hooves thundered as federal marshals rode into the square, their boots loud on the cobblestones, badges glinting in the Oklahoma sun. They pushed through, seizing Ramsey, his face pale as they cuffed his wrists, his shouts of innocence lost in the crowd's jeers. Barrett shrank back, his head bowed, cuffed without a word, his composure crumbling. Nadie stood frozen, relief flooding her, the weight of her fight lifting. David's arms circled her, his whisper, "We did it," warm against her ear, his bloodied face softening with pride. Lila raised the Cherokee flag, her song soaring, the crowd joining in a triumphant chant. The marshals led the men away, the square erupting in cheers, Nadie's heart swelling, though Tayanita's absence cast a shadow, his sacrifice fueling her victory. Hank bolted through the crowd, his face twisted in panic, shoving past Cherokee to escape. A young man shouted, pointing him out, his voice sharp with anger. The crowd surged, blocking Hank's path, their hands grabbing his coat, holding him firm. Marshals pushed through, cuffing him, his curses fading as they dragged him off. Nadie watched, her mind flashing to the burned shed, his destruction now meaningless. Lila hugged her, her words fierce, proclaiming the tribe's pride, her eyes shining. David wiped blood from his cheek, his smile weary but warm, standing close. Nadie's chest tightened, the weight of their win sinking in, her thoughts on Tayanita, wishing he could see their triumph, the square a testament to their unyielding spirit. Nadie walked home, the dusk heavy, her steps slow as she neared the quiet house. She pushed the door open, her heart shattering at Tayanita's empty bed, the silence deafening. Lila followed, her voice soft, revealing he'd passed just after their victory, his final breath a quiet release. Nadie sank to her knees, sobs racking her, the loss, a knife in her chest. She touched his pillow, his stories echoing, his courage still alive in her. David knelt beside her, his hand gentle, his presence a steady comfort through her grief. Lila placed wildflowers by the bed, her eyes wet, honoring Tayanita's sacrifice. Nadie whispered a vow to carry his legacy, her tears falling, the room a sacred space of love and loss, her fight now his eternal echo. The Cherokee gathered under a somber sky, the scent of cedar thick as they honored Tayanita. Nadie stood by his grave, her traditional dress heavy, her hands clutching a woven shawl. Elders chanted, their voices deep, weaving prayers that rose with the wind. Lila sang a farewell song, her voice breaking, tears streaking her face. David held Nadie's hand, his grip firm, sharing her sorrow in silence. The tribe laid flowers, their murmurs praising Tayanita's wisdom, his sacrifice a light for their future. Nadie spoke, her voice choked, recounting his bravery, her love for him spilling out. She felt his spirit watching, her heart easing, the ceremony a bridge between grief and pride, binding her to her people's enduring strength. Nadie stood before the Cherokee elders in the meeting hall, the air thick with the scent of sage and solemn pride. Her voice was steady as she recounted Ramsey and Barrett's arrest, the victory hard won through their fight. The elders nodded, their faces lined with respect, praising her courage as a beacon for the tribe. They vowed to protect Cherokee land forever, their words a solemn oath that lifted Nadie's spirit. Her heart ached, Tayanita's absence a quiet wound, and she spoke of his guidance, hoping he saw their triumph. Lila entered, her eyes bright, sharing news of a tribal celebration planned to honor their success. Nadie agreed to join, her resolve firm to carry forward for her people. She left the hall, her steps lighter, the elders' support a warm embrace, though her grandfather's memory lingered, urging her to stay strong. The town square glowed with firelight, as Lila led Nadie through the celebrating Cherokee, their songs rising under the Oklahoma stars. Lila raised the tribal flag, its colors vivid, her face alight with pride for their victory. Nadie stood among them, the crowd's unity a heartbeat, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience. David shared their story, his words stirring the tribe, his bruised face softened by hope. A few white townsfolk approached, their nods respectful, a sign of growing trust between communities. Nadie smiled, her heart warmed by the connection, Tayanita's dream of harmony alive in their gathering. She touched the shawl Lila had given her, its threads a link to her grandfather, his legacy fueling her quiet joy. The crowd's cheers wrapped around her, a moment of triumph tempered by love and loss. Nadie walked to Tayanita's grave at dawn, the Oklahoma hills golden, her hands cradling wildflowers. She knelt, whispering of their victory, her voice soft, feeling his spirit close as sunlight filtered through the trees. David joined her, his touch gentle on her shoulder, his silence a shared mourning. Lila arrived, carrying a woven blanket, a gift from the tribe, her eyes warm with sisterly love. Nadie wrapped the blanket around her, its weight a comfort, the tribe's gratitude grounding her. She spoke to David, her voice steady, sharing her dream to preserve Cherokee ways. They stood together, the quiet morning sacred, Tayanita's courage, a pulse in her veins. Nadie's heart swelled, her grief softening, the grave, a place of renewal, her promise to her grandfather unbroken. The Cherokee gathered in the square, their voices strong as elders declared the land protected forever. Nadie watched, her chest tight with pride, the signed federal agreement a testament to their fight. Lila leaned close, her whisper fierce, detailing Ramsey's final downfall, her smile triumphant. David's arm circled Nadie, his words soft, marveling at their impact, his presence a steady anchor. The tribe sang, their song a victory cry, echoing across the hills. Nadie's gaze lifted to the sky, Tayanita's spirit a quiet presence, his sacrifice woven into their success. She vowed silently to keep fighting for justice, her heart full of purpose. The crowd's unity enveloped her, a living tribute to their resilience. The future, bright with possibility. The Oklahoma sun rose high, bathing the Cherokee lands in gold as Nadie stood by Tayanita's grave, her fingers brushing the earth. David stood beside her, his hand in hers, their love a bridge, accepted by both communities. Ramsey and Barrett faced prison, their scheme shattered, the land safe. The tribe hailed Nadie as a hero, their chants a warm embrace, her courage a light for their future. She whispered to Tayanita, promising to uphold his legacy, her voice thick with emotion. Lila's song rang out, its Cherokee melody soaring, binding the crowd in shared triumph. Nadie and David faced the horizon, their commitment to justice unwavering, Tayanita's sacrifice a guiding star. The vast sky stretched above, love and loyalty conquering prejudice. Justice won through their pain, a testament to their enduring fight.